keeps its promises in the quiet, promises to swallow what doesn't belong, to keep what it's given, to make a ritual out of forgetting. Even before the engine cut and the oar touched the water, the air had that dull metallic taste that says grief never learned to die here. It learned to tread and wait beneath the surface, as patient as winter. This is where my father drowned, they told me. This is where the water decided it knew him better than I ever would. Even then, standing at the shore with cedar breath in my lungs and the wind like fingers combing the reeds, I could feel it, a hum under my ribs, like something knocking from the other side of a door. The title of this trip sat in my sternum. Take back what was taken. Bring bones home. Make the water admit it had teeth. The cabin door stuck like it always did, and I should have laughed at the memory of him shouldering it open with mock impatience. The way it startled a cloud of dust that floated about like private weather. I should have, but the joke was a ghost. The plates we'd left behind, greased with fish skin, and old Joy still leaned where we'd last stacked them, an arrangement that looked less like laziness and more like a prayer no one remembered how to finish. The cheap animatronic fish with its cigarette-burn eyes hung crooked on the wall, its silent mouth still open around a song. I touched its rubber lip and thought of the day he held up the line with both hands, pretending almost childish awe at something as simple as silver weight. We ate that fish with butter and lemon and too much salt, because the lake made everything taste like thirst. What I wanted was simple enough to fit in a pocket. To ask my father why he left every room like it was my fault. To ask why one afternoon on the lake could feel like the world was briefly learning the shape of us. What I wanted wasn't simple enough for the water. I wanted the myth at the lake's center to wear a face I could blame. I wanted the monster to be real, so that grief could stand up and be killed. I'd heard the stories like everyone else, knees pressed together around a fire, faces bright with the courage we borrow from light. A giant fish, old as the first lie, open-mouthed enough to remove a boat from the map of the living. Why would an exceptional swimmer drown? Why would a man with fingers made for rope and oar surrender to water he named by its moods? My father called the legend stupid every time it came up, made fun of the way fear dresses in scales, because it's embarrassed to say its own name. But I am not my father. I drove alone with a spear gun, a machete, and a 12-gauge I pretended I didn't intend on using. The metal smelled like a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. I lined up my gear on the boat's bench like a prayer, turned the key, and rode the engine's sound into the lake's open mouth. Sun made glitter out of ripples. Dragonflies stitched the air. A loon's laugh carried across the water and felt somehow familiar, like a family joke told in a language we don't admit to knowing. Past the dock, past the safe water he'd kept me to, past the coordinates where the police had looked bored and professional. I cut the engine and listened. That was the moment the lake introduced itself with silence, which is a way of waving without showing your hands. I baited a line because I needed my fear to have a job. The first tug felt like memory, my father's hand on my shoulder, just enough pressure to say now. 2 small catches took my mind off the ache behind my eyes, their bodies flicking the sun into shards, their mouths opening and closing in disbelief at air. Time collapsed into the shimmer. Then came the tug that belonged in someone else's story, violently decisive, like the world had been waiting to say finally. The line didn't simply pull, it drew a line through me and set the hook behind my sternum. The reel locked. My shoulder burned. And then the rod leapt from my hands like it had been given permission. It came from beneath the boat, first the absence of sound, then the sound of impact. A blunt subterranean fist slammed the hull, and every nerve in my calves lit up. Water slapped the sides like a crowd answering a performance. I reached for the spear gun and felt how useless and necessary it was to have something sharp in a soft world circling below. A wide, dark coil with the absence of light that looks like color until you blink. Then a hand, if a hand could have been disappointed by its own design. Scaly, slick, with a grip that made boards complain. The engine sputtered like a dying joke. Another hand. Then a face that wanted to be called a face, only in the way. All hungers are named, 4 small tentacles where a mouth might be, each lined with suction cups like a necklace of wants. And in the center, a beak the color of hard decisions, eyes glossy and distant, blinking horizontally like tired gates. The sound I made wasn't a scream. It was the rattle of a lock that's been waiting years for a key. I fired. The spear kissed, something soft and real in the chest of the thing. And black blood rose like obscene ink, like someone writing in a language the air refused to read. The creature tipped backward into its other country, the water closing over it like a neighborhood. I hit the ignition again, and the boat coughed awake. And for a moment, salvation felt like forward motion. Arms. A bouquet of limbs along the starboard side, deliberate and heavy. The boat slanting toward invitation. I saw other heads breaching, their eyes cured to the color of old jars, their tentacles tasting the wind. I swung the machete like I could argue them back to the dark. Bone or cartilage, I don't know which, gave in a way that felt both merciful and wrong. A head fell with the sound of wet rope, and the boat rocked like applause. Something found my arm, suction cups mapping me before the beak bit, and I became a seam. The pain was architectural, my body. Suddenly a building I did not have the plans for. I reached a second spear by accident, shoved it into an eye like I was trying to put out a star. It screamed, not like a voice, but like hull metal does when it hates the world and let go. The engine obeyed. The arms unlearned me, sure grew a face again. In the cabin bathroom, I poured disinfectant like courage and wrapped my arm tight enough to make the room a tunnel. The bandage which turned the color of words better left unsaid. My phone was too clean in my dirty hand. The dispatcher on the other end asked me to repeat myself twice before her voice changed the way voices do when they decide to treat you like a person who might be telling the truth. It wasn't until I unwrapped my arm for the deputy, with a mustache shaped like doubt, that their faces practiced belief. They collected statements like shells, pretty, incomplete, harmless. I left before the lake could hear me say thank you. I left before the water could learn my new name. That night, thirst developed a personality. Water didn't help. It traversed my throat like an apology and left my tongue dry as string. The skin around the bite darkened, its texture changing into something that remembered scale better than it remembered me. In the bathroom mirror, my irises looked pale, like they were trying to become windows on the inner lining of my lips. Tiny holes formed where there hadn't been anything but the language of human need. I slept without sleeping, my dreams all green and slow, my ears tuned for waves that didn't reach the inside of the house. Morning didn't have a name anymore. It was just the lake breathing through the walls, and a sentence I had been avoiding that finally learned to say itself. Maybe the water didn't just take my father, it took its time with me. Part 2. The sheriffs left tracks in the dirt like they were drawing maps for a future in which they found something that made sense. They promised a search team at dawn, promised sonar and divers and documents. They promised, in the careful voice people use when reality is an impolite guest, that accidents happen even to careful men, even to exceptional swimmers, even to sons who believe myth before math. After they left, I pressed my ear to the cabin wall and heard the hollow inside of pine, that soft emptiness that knows it's been decorated to pretend otherwise. The lake's breath reached through the boards in a damp exhale. I should have packed. I should have muttered the old phrases. Enough is enough. Move on. Go home. And let the car decide the rest. Instead, I boiled coffee so dark the cup felt like a moon, and stared at my bandage like it might volunteer an explanation. Pain is honest in the ugliest ways. It told me to sit, and I sat. It told me to stand, and I stood. When I unwrapped the gauze, the bite looked less like violence and more like a signature. The edges were changing, becoming the idea of skin instead of skin itself, textured with a faint pattern that made me think of sunlight on water. My mouth felt busy even when I wasn't speaking, the soft interior rearranging itself like furniture. The thirst was a discipline. Every swallow was a plan that failed. When I lifted the cup, the steam smelled weak and wrong, like trying to drink a picture of a river. I walked to the sink and let cold tap water run over my palms. The cool felt like grammar returning to language, but the relief didn't last. My reflection had the pallor of an unfinished story. My irises were now diluted, a color that suggested absence. I called my mother, and for the first time in months, she answered on the first ring. Her hello arrived already crying. Maybe she had been crying for days, and the sound had simply decided to be honest with me now. I wanted to confess the whole new alphabet of fear. The way each letter was carved wetly across my arm. But she said his name in a way that made me look at the sink. At the way water gathers itself to fall, and call it purpose. She said she dreamed of him last night, standing ankle deep at the waterline like a boy skimming stones across a mirror that refused to break. Sometimes grief is not an avalanche. Sometimes it's a road sign. We miss the turn, and then the turn misses us. I'm at the lake, I finally said. Silence on her end assembled itself into a room. I thought you knew better, she said, but the sentence failed to put the hook into scolding. I need to see where he was last, I told her. I need to ask something that isn't a person. She made the sound she makes when she is trying not to ask me to be someone I can't be. Bring something back, she whispered, even if it's just a stone. The line clicked quiet. I stared at the tap until the water ran so long it felt like language. I cupped it to my mouth again and again. It refused me with politeness. By afternoon, the search team's engine sounds knitted into the day like a new kind of wind. The boat cut across the lake's surface with the impatience of men who believe maps more than stories. I watched from the shore, a spectator at my own trial. Sunlight slid in thin sheets across their life vests. I wanted to warn them about the arms. I wanted to tell them the water has a politics, that it opens itself to those who arrive with ritual and closes around men who bring only intention. Instead, I raised a hand no one saw and swallowed another mouthful of failure. The first diver went in like a coin tossed into a wish. What came back wasn't a body. It wasn't even the diver. It was the boat, empty save for the gear, arranged with the kind of order that implies panic, had not yet had time to rearrange the world. The surface where the man had disappeared into was unmarked, as if someone had taken an eraser to that part of the afternoon. The second diver's rope pulled taut once, twice, like a shared joke, and then relaxed permanently. No scream, no splash chorus, no drama. The lake does not perform for its audience. It eats. The men on the boat started naming things to keep them. Names outrun the bargain of breath. An officer on the shore near me touched his radio and touched it again, marking time on a device that only knows human emergencies. The lake ignored all of us. That night, the thirst woke me like a knock. I didn't bother with the cup. I went down to the dock and knelt, both hands on the edge like prayer, and lowered my face toward the reflection I didn't trust. The lake's surface met my lips with the imitation of kindness, its warmth residual from the day. The first sip tasted like iron and memory. The second was an instruction. I swallowed until my throat softened, until the ache behind my eyes stepped back. The holes along the inside of my lips pulsed with attention, and for the first time since the bite, they made sense. The body is a translator. It will change the language to keep the meaning alive. When I sat back, my hands were webbed with cold. Not webbed, exactly, just pruned long past pruning. The lines of my palms deepening into maps no one had taught me to read. The skin around the wound shimmered faintly under the moon, a texture like the underside of a fish. I flexed my fingers and heard a sound that wasn't bone or tendon, a soft suction, a kiss of surface. Panic tried to rise with its old arguments, but another voice, low, tidal, answered it. Not yet, it said. Not while we are learning. Dreams came like weather. In them, I was both on the boat and under it, in air and not needing it, watching my father's body as if it were a school of light moving in perfect shape. He did not look at me. He looked at where I was going. You're late, he said without mouth, the way water says rock by touching it endlessly. I reached for him, and my hand came apart into shapes that understood current. You always told me there's nothing down there, I told him. He smiled, and the smile was the horizon. I told you what I needed to believe, he said, but I did not tell you what I feared. I woke with salt on my tongue, and the first light penciling the floor with thin gray decisions. The search team did not come back the second day. The radio at the cabin barked a little, then lost interest. Fish bones near the sink made a smell like old newspaper. The animatronic fish stared with its plastic patience. I walked to the waterline and stood where I had stood as a boy, his hand cupping the back of my neck so lightly the touch felt like invented memory. The lake had not moved, but everything in it had. I slipped my shoes off and let my feet learn cold again. Mud took my weight like a secret. For a moment, there was a temptation small and sure as a breath to stop resisting. Part 3, the day I decided to row back to the center. Rain stitched the world with thin gray thread. It wasn't a storm, just a persistent reminder that the sky can be undecided and still fall on you. The boat's wood had swelled with yesterday's mistakes, and the oars took my palms into their rough confidence. Each stroke dug a groove in the water, and each groove closed behind me without apology. I was not going to the center for revenge anymore. Revenge requires a certainty I no longer owned. I was going there because some doors open toward you and some away, and if you push the wrong way long enough, you mistake resistance for refusal. The wound on my arm itched like a second heartbeat. When I cut the engine this time, the silence did not feel empty. It felt full of careful listening. I was not alone. I said it aloud the way someone says a spell. I am not alone. The phrase made small circles in the air and landed on the water with a faith I envied. The first shadow came from beneath me, slow as a thought you've been trying not to have. Then another. Their movements were almost tender, as if they knew the boat was a fragile idea with a man balanced on it, as breakable as the arguments he brought. A hand surfaced, and then a shoulder, and then a head. This one did not rush me. It lifted itself to show me the eyes first. so I could see the film sliding sideways, so I could feel the dignity the lake had given it like a uniform. I raised the spear gun, but didn't aim. The creature, if that's still the name I'm allowed to use, considered me with a patience that had outlived human anger. The tentacles around its mouth moved idly, tasting rain. The beak clicked once, twice, a sound like a metronome for some other timing. It brought its palm up open, empty, the universal gesture of truce that soldiers and children both invent when they are tired. And in that palm, a ring, plain, gold, human. The kind of ring that keeps a calendar in its circle. My throat closed around a sentence I had not prepared. The ring was my father's. Not because I recognized it. He'd never kept jewelry on at the lake, but because I recognized it anyway. Recognition is a muscle that lives in the dark and doesn't require proof to grow strong. I lowered the spear. My body made the sound that happens when you finally stop pretending you can carry a weight alone. Where is he? I asked, voice breaking on the dock of the question. The creature blinked slowly, then turned its head toward the lake's center, tilting it like a man remembering a path he once cleared with his hands. More of them gathered, a ring of heads around my boat, their bodies held beneath the surface like a secret they were still choosing to keep. If they had wanted to take me, it would have been a practiced ease. Instead, they stood watch, or perhaps witness. I took the ring with fingers that trembled for reasons that belonged to both fear and something that wasn't fear. The metal was warm, as if it had been worn by a story that still had a pulse. When I slid it into my pocket, all the air around us shifted. The rain got quieter. The water darkened the way ink does when someone corrects a mistake. I leaned over the side, careful not to tip my confession into their custody, and peered down into the color that means keep out. Then something rose, not an arm, not a head. A shape, elongated, arrhythmic, almost graceful, made of many smaller parts agreeing to a single plan. It was a school, but not a fish of memories, maybe. The way small things can agree to act like a larger thing. In the ripples of that mass, I saw my father's shoulders, the set of his jaw, the comfortable slouch he wore when he didn't think anyone needed him to be a father. "What are you doing?" I whispered, not to the creatures, not to the water, but to the part of myself that had declared war and had to now consider surrender. The tentacles on the closest one brushed the boat's edge and left a trail like a blessing or a warning. I placed my hand near, not touching, letting the air between us do the work. The holes in my inner lip pulsed again, little doors opening and closing to a language I was beginning to pronounce without shame. In my mouth, the taste of the lake shifted. It wasn't metal now, but mineral. Not iron, but stone. My body stopped arguing with the thirst long enough to listen. The creature's beak clicked again, and in that click, I heard a sequence. Not a word, but a rhythm. My father had drummed that rhythm on the doorframe when I was 9, and we were late to the movie. I laughed before I could tell myself not to. and the sound surprised both of us. "You can keep me," I said, not to offer, but to test the shape of the sentence. The ring in my pocket burned like a coin heated on a stove. The water sighed under the hull like someone shifting in sleep. The creature's head tilted, and then, slowly, it sank back until only the eyes remained, level with rain. An old impulse revived itself, primitive and precise. To dive, to go below, to see what my father saw before the water wrote his name differently. The wound on my arm hummed. My feet found the edge of the boat. "Not yet," I said, and it sounded like a translation when the sky broke open into a real storm. They scattered with a single thought I could not share. I rode the engine back with the feeling of having rescinded a resignation. At the dock, the ring burned again, then cooled. In the cabin, I placed it on the table beside the plates, like an answer that refused to simplify the question. I slept on the floor, closer to the earth, and dreamed of a river beneath the lake, where things went to decide what they wanted to be. My father stood on its bank and did not wave me over. He put his hands in his pockets the way he always did when he had made a decision he believed would hurt me less if he pretended it didn't hurt him. In the morning, my skin itched for water the way hungry mouths itch for teeth. I walked to the shore with the certainty of someone approaching a ceremony they have not been taught, but remember anyway. At ankle depth, the cold felt like permission. At knee depth, it felt like instruction. At waist depth, it felt like home and a warning. The first time I submerged my head, the holes along my lips flared open and closed like flowers startled by light. The world went quiet in the way quiet becomes orchestra when it's earned. I didn't stay long. When I came up, I gasped out of habit and not necessity. The animatronic fish sang in my head, a tinny melody that felt suddenly less ridiculous. All myths are ugly when they are facts. Part 4. The lake waited. That's the verb that finally fit. Not haunted, not hunted, not held. It waited the way a patient teacher waits for a student to finish the sentence that changes the heart. I took the ring and a length of rope and a knife I didn't plan to use and rode to the coordinates no map could admit without becoming myth itself. Mid-lake, the wind stopped commuting, as if the world had decided to be very clear with me. I cut the engine and looked at my hands. The lines in my palms had deepened into small riverbeds, branching, meeting, splitting. I placed my fingers in the water, and they stuck with a familiar suction, a belonging that had the decency to ask consent. "I want him back," I said, voice careful. "I want you to give him back." The water stilled in attention. Under the hull, something moved, not menacing, not gentle, just present. "If I come," I continued, "if I come down, will you show me where he is?" Lightning thought about it somewhere out of sight. Thunder kept its opinions to itself. The holes along my lips flexed, and a coolness spread along my sinuses, the way spring spreads under snow. I realized, take this breath and mean it underwater. One of them rose beside the boat, as if my sentence had been a bell. Its eyes, those pale, jar-curious eyes, regarded me without deciding what kind of story I belonged to. It lifted its palm again. In it, a watch. Old, scratched, the kind that ticks loud in quiet rooms. My father's. The band was leather gone soft with years. I took it, and when the creature let it go, the lake made a little sound like a throat clearing before a confession. The watch face was stopped. The second hand had died pointing at a 12. Noon or midnight, I could not tell. You took him, I whispered. Or he came. The creature's tentacles fluttered like leaves in small wind. Choice is a real thing until it becomes a story. I tied the rope around my waist, the other end to the boat's bench, an idiotic gesture, symbolic at best, fatal at worst. The knot felt like a parent's attempt at safety, the performative version, the version that says I tried. I dangled my feet over and let my calves go numb. The creature sank, slow, as if leading by example. I swallowed, and the new parts of me answered, opening and closing in a rhythm I hadn't asked for, but now knew was mine. The surface broke over my head with a quiet that startled my bones. Underwater, the world decided to be a cathedral. Light fell in columns that failed to reach the floor, and in those columns drifted silt like incense. The first thing I saw that was not water was the boat, the one from the search team turned on its side, a tilt that looked like an apology. A rope hung down from nowhere, untying itself in slow motion. My lungs did not speak panic. My chest moved with the water's gentle insistence. The holes along my lips drank in and gave back, a tide on a small scale. The creature paced me, keeping a distance that wasn't distrust so much as respect for a threshold. The bottom came up with a patience that made me forgive every slow thing that had ever kept me company. Stones arranged themselves not randomly, but according to a math I did not understand, yet the silt held footprints that didn't have feet. I reached for one, and my fingers met, water the way fingers meet skin. They were both barrier and invitation. The ring in my pocket weighed differently here, as if the lake had inflated it with memory. The watch face reflected the dim light and failed to keep time for both of us. He was not a body. He was not bones. He was a suggestion, a nested set of possibilities organized around a center that might have once been a man. His shirt, a flannel we bought at a gas station, because the night surprised us, moved as if in wind that wasn't here. His hair made small motions like weeds. He faced away, which was exactly right. He had spent his living life both with me and away from me. He was about to do the same with his after. When he turned, I saw the failure and the love arrive together. The eyes were wrong, pale, and bladed, but the warmth behind them was not. He lifted his hand in a gesture I'd seen 1,000 times, palm up. Fingers relaxed. An invitation to share something we both knew we didn't have the words for. The holes in my lips widened, The water added itself to my blood like a new vowel. I reached. Our hands met, and suction kissed suction. The touch was not grotesque. It was ordinary. It was the way a father steadies a child stepping onto a boat for the first time. The rope at my waist tugged then, a reminder of the surface and its old rules. I panicked at the wrong thing, the idea of leaving, not the idea of staying. My father's mouth moved around the tentacles, and a click came out, then another, scaffolding a message whose architecture I recognized. Late, he said again, but different. Late, as in not too late. Late, as in we have time if you want it. He pointed toward the stones, then to his chest, then to mine. He did not ask for forgiveness. Neither did I. We swam, or rather, he escorted me through a space that felt suddenly curated, between stones, along a trench where light pooled like coins in an offering plate, up past a tangle of weeds that remembered touch. He showed me the boat that did not belong, the rope that meant nothing here. The watch stopped at the moment time, chose a different vocabulary. I wanted to weep, but the water did not consent to tears. So I let the feeling move to my hands, and they learned a new gesture, something like prayer, something like surrender, something my father recognized, and through recognition, blessed when I surfaced, hours or heartbeats later. The sky had remade itself into evening's soft certainty. The boat bobbed, as if relieved to have remembered its job. In my pocket, the ring and the watch lay together like old friends who had finally admitted they were not enemies. The creature who had brought me there watched me with an intimacy that didn't require closeness. "Thank you," I said, and something in my mouth clicked in answer. A sound that meant you're welcome in a grammar made of tide. The decision did not arrive as a trumpet. It arrived as a small kindness I didn't extend to myself often. I would not force the lake to undo what it had done. I would not demand it return my father in a form that would only disappoint both of us. I would visit. I would learn. I would let the holes along my lips be doors instead of wounds. I would teach my mother how to hold a ring without letting it burn. I would forgive the animatronic fish for its stupid song. I would let the cabin door stick and be grateful for doors that make you try twice. Cliffhanger. That night, standing at the shoreline with the ring on a string around my neck, I felt the itch transform into pulse. The skin around my wound shimmered, then stilled. When I smiled, the holes along my lips opened and closed like laughing. From the dark water, something surfaced, not a creature, not exactly. A shape my size, a face my age. It lifted its palm, open, empty. The beak in the center of its mouth clicked twice, rhythm I knew. My father's rhythm. "Tomorrow," I said, and the water repeated it back in syllables the air could not carry. Syllables the air could not carry.